This is the Deliberate Talks Weekly Podcast, powered by the Pixelated Egg Digital Ventures. Tune in every week to learn something new about digital marketing and entrepreneurship. And now, over to the voice of your host, Dakshin Adyanthaya. Enjoy the show.
Hello, and you have tuned in to a brand new episode of the Deliberate Talks podcast, and my name is Dakshin Adyanthaya, welcoming you today to start your week with a brand new perspective to career and life goals. And before we talk to Angela, our guest today, here are some facts about career goals. A study from Monster suggests nearly 80% of professionals would consider a permanent work from home policy. And 27% of workers said that the ability to work from home is so important to them that they're willing to take a 10 to 20% pay cut to work remotely. Also for corporates, according to Glassdoor, on an average, each corporate job offer attracts 250 resumes. Of those candidates, 4 to 6 of them get called for an interview and only one of them get the job. And nearly 80% of millennials look for people and culture fit with employers, followed by career potential. And to talk more about this, today we have an international life purpose and career coach. She helps driven professionals who feel stuck and unfulfilled to discover their purpose so that they can have both the impact and the income they want. Her coaching stems from experiences and lessons learned over 10 years of finding her purpose in corporate startups and nonprofits in US, Africa, Asia, and Europe. Let's understand more about this meaningful world from Angela Choi. Hello, Angela. Welcome to the Deliberate Talks podcast. How are you doing today?
Hi, Dakshin. I'm doing well, Dakshin. Thanks so much for having me. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much. And Angela, I've been reading about your entire journey and it's been very interesting. And I want to get into straight asking you, you are a life purpose and career coach. Let's take a step back and jump into a life before that. What was the purpose back then and why and how did you decide to make a shift?
Yeah, I think that I've always known that I've wanted to help people. It's just that the capacity in which I was doing that was different. And I think, when I was younger, especially, when I was in college and my early 20s, I think I just had this expectation from other people that I took on as my own to really focus on making money, right? And for me, that was working in the corporate world. And I started out in consulting and I realized slowly that the corporate world wasn't for me. And so it's been a journey of going back to I did a 180 and then decided to go in the corporate world. And I think my journey since then has been going from my head into my heart. So that's been my journey.
Wow. I noticed that you also have written somewhere that you wanted to become a teacher, a nurse, or a psychologist. Is that true?
Yes. So some of that was fulfilled. For example, I didn't end up being a psychologist, but I studied psychology in undergrad. And I did go into college thinking that maybe I wanted to be a teacher. But then in college, I felt like, actually, I don't think that I necessarily want to do that. I feel like I can help people in other capacities. And then I was also just worried about, how would I make this work on a teacher's salary? And then for nursing, I went to high school focused on science. It was a science and math oriented high school. And it was there that I realized science classes are not my favorite classes. So I don't think going down the medical route would make sense for me. So I found different ways of weeding that out. But at the core, I knew that I wanted to help people. So that's remained true.
Wow. And when did you actually decide to step back and get completely into coaching and the other aspects to it? How long has it been for you?
Yeah, it's been many years. So this is a really good question. When I started working, even before then, I was always very focused on becoming a better version of myself. And I think that a lot of coaches start out that way. They are focused on personal development and then there's a transformation along the way. And after they go through the transformation, they want to help other people do the same, right? And I would say that my journey is very similar to that in the sense that, when I was trying to figure out what it is that I wanted to do in terms of my career and how I wanted to live my life, I asked myself a lot of questions and I was doing a lot of work on myself. I also focused a lot on spirituality. And so it's been a lot of years doing it myself. And then in the process, I realized that I could help other people through this. And it was also kind of happening at the same time because even when I was in the corporate world, working in consulting, for example, I was helping college students who were interested in getting into consulting, right? So that's one way of helping people, right?
Right.
And then before I became a full-time coach, I was working for a nonprofit organization and I was doing a little bit of career coaching there. So it was never like I wasn't doing this type of work. I was always doing this type of work, whether it was leading workshops for people focused on personal and professional development, but I was doing that as a side hobby. And I think over time, I realized that I really enjoy doing this and I really think that I can help people. And that's when I decided to do it full time.
Right. Very interesting. And tell me honestly, were you like a very competitive person at the workplace?
Yes, I was a very competitive person, for better or for worse. I think about this a lot actually, because so I'm from New York City and I am a product of the public school system. And I'm not sure if you understand how it works, but from a very early age, education was very competitive. So even to get into middle school, it's like you have thousands of students vying for a few spots in a select middle school. And then for high school, it's the same thing. You have there are specialized high schools in New York City, and it's like every year, I think like 30,000 eighth graders go take this one exam to try to get into these specialized high schools. And then obviously the college admissions process is really competitive as well. So for better or for worse, I feel like it was conditioned in me that I became this very competitive person. But I will say that as an adult, my mindset on that has completely shifted. I don't think that life is about being better than other people or coming out on top. I think that what's important and what's most important is living your truth. And oftentimes living your truth actually means going against the grain of things where you're not directly competing with other people. And instead, it's about just, again, being a better version of yourself. Like the only person you should be comparing yourself against is the person you were yesterday. And that's the mindset that I've learned to adopt over the years versus comparing myself to the people around me.
Right. And it's a very interesting aspect. And the reason why I ask you this is because you want to help others and you are competitive yourself. The perception that a third person might have is actually they might envy your lifestyle. They might envy the way you work and probably think you're more perfect than them. That's a complex that someone might actually feel. Have you ever felt that?
No, because so here's the thing. No one is perfect.
Right.
And I think the first example I can think of is just like Bill Gates, right? Like people could look at him and think like, wow, his life is great. We don't really know that, right? And he just, they're going to go through a divorce, right? But I think before that, would people have thought that his life was perfect? Like he's one of the richest men in the world. He's been married for 27 years. He owns Microsoft. I think people would think that he has a perfect life, right? So this is to say that no one's life is perfect and mine is far from it, right? I think really life is just about, there's always work to be done, is my belief. And I'm saying like work in terms of like work on ourselves. Right. So I hope I don't give off the impression that I'm perfect because I feel far from perfect. And I think that perfectionism, it's dangerous to think that is attainable. Striving for this goal that's hard to reach, impossible to reach.
True. The only reason is because, any life better than ours, in most cases, people feel anyone having a life better than theirs is actually close to perfect. It might not be a perfect life, but they assume that this is a better life. And hence that part of perfection is what I mentioned. But yeah,
Yes. I want to comment on that. I think that you bring up a really good point. So, people say the grass is greener on the other side,
right,
right?
right.
It's not true. And I think that a more fitting statement would be the grass is green where you water it. And what I mean by that is the thing is like, there will always be people out there who have quote unquote better lives. Again, we don't know that because externally they may be presenting a certain way, but internally you don't know what's going on, right? The
Mm-hmm.
second thing is that for everyone who's quote unquote doing better than you, there are people who are doing quote unquote worse than you, right? And so
Right.
there's no point in comparing, right? But what we could focus our attention on instead is acknowledging what we do have and what is working in our life and being grateful for that. Because I imagine, like whatever you're grateful for, it's like where your attention goes, energy flows, and you attract more of that into your life. If you want more of something, focus on what you do have and focus on being grateful for what is and grateful for what is about to come. And that's how you get your life to a different place.
Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you have gone places too. You have got your life to different aspects of it. You've done so many interesting things in this process of self-realization and coaching, yoga, silent meditation, retreats, cooking, crossfits, and traveling around the world. What life lessons stepped in with each of these experiences, if you have any interesting stories to share?
Yeah, I have a lot of things to say, I guess. The first is it's so important to do what makes you happy and do what calls to you. And I think that sometimes we have this feeling that we need to do things because it makes sense logically or because of what people are telling us. And I think a really good example of this is, I just had this feeling that I really wanted to go to India and do yoga teacher training. I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
entirely sure if I wanted to be a yoga instructor, but at the very least, I knew that I wanted to do it for my own spiritual growth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did it, right? And I think it's really important if you have the means and the time and the resources to do the things that really speak to you. That's so important because I think we spend, especially like in our 20s and 30s, a feeling of like, you need to keep up with the Joneses and like see what other people are doing. But I think it's important to turn inward to ask yourself what it is that you truly want out of this lifetime. It's really important to live according to your values and what is important to you, right? And so the reason why I've done all these things, silent meditation retreats, like doing CrossFit and Krav Maga and trying these different things is because my personal philosophy is that life begins at the end of your comfort zone. And so I'm always looking for ways to challenge myself in mind, body, and spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I feel like I've become too comfortable, then I look for ways that I can try new things and do things that I've never done before to stretch myself to see what I'm actually capable of. And that's why I do those things. And so I really invite people to think about what it is that's important to them and then to make choices that align with their values and what is important to them.
Very interesting. And just going back from a career aspect of it, somewhere we all have been in a shift of scrutinizing our own lives and career choices, right? Let's take an example of career. Say at 30, one realizes that they're done with one industry or a skill set and they should look at making a change. They want to, look at changing their industry maybe. How should they look at making that change to identify the new skill? What is it that they should look at according to you?
I think so this is a very open-ended question because I don't know the specifics behind it, right? Like,
Right.
for example, what industry is this person in? What is it that they want to pivot into, right? Because depending on the industry, the level of difficulty in terms of making the shift can vary, right?
Right.
And so I think that it's a combination of when you have an idea of what it is that you would like to shift into, it's about talking to people who are in that industry so that you have an understanding of how that industry works, what the industry is looking for, and then building out your skill sets accordingly, right? Because if you've been known as an expert in one field and you want to jump into something different, you have to start building out your credibility right? And the way to do that is to build your skills and then also expand your network and talk to people who are currently in that industry so that you understand how it works and maybe even get your foot through the door. So this can happen in many ways. I think that one of the easiest way to do this is to go back to school. But I feel like there's so many options available now online, whether that's taking online classes or whether that's getting a certificate. So that's not the only way to do it. I think that it also just depends on your circumstances, right? So it's like if you are, let's say, I'm just throwing out an example, like if you're in operations and then all of a sudden you want to do engineering, right? Then that requires like a different level of expertise and skills versus the other way around.
Right. And, just extending that part of it where you're talking about upskilling and other solutions, but what about those people who don't know really what they want to do, right? If that's one of the common concerns, is feeling you want to do something more, but you don't know what it is, right? Like many explore hobbies, interests, you said, upskilling, even watch their friends becoming influencers, travelers, bloggers, and say, that's the kind of life I want to live. Now, how can one really find that right thing for themselves? And more importantly, that peace and joy in finding that right thing to do. How does that process work?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question. So I wanted to share with you that I have a free guide on my website called 6 Steps to Living Your Purpose at angelachoi.co. And so I go through 6 steps that I invite people to take to really tap into their purpose. And, some of the steps, which I'll go through very briefly, they're aligned to some of the things I've done in the past, right? So the first step is to be present and breathe still so that you are aware of the thoughts that are looping in your mind and you can be aware of them and then let them pass, that you can focus on your inner voice of wisdom, right? So that you can tune inward. That's the first step. The second step is to reflect on your past, right? To think about the things that you've enjoyed, the things that you were good at, your hobbies and your interests, especially at a younger age, because the younger you were, the less you cared about what other people thought of you. And that is the essence of the true you, right? The you before you felt like you needed to meet other people's expectations and the you before the conditioning, right?
Mm-hmm.
The third is what I shared with you earlier, which is to align with your values. Like what's important to you? What do you stand for? Like, what are your top 3 to 5 values? And when you know what those are, anytime there's a crossroad and you need to make a decision, it's easier for you to make decisions if you know what it is that you stand for. The next thing is to do without your inner critic, right? And we all have one, right? It's the voices in our head that tell us that we're not good enough, that there are other people out there already doing what it is that we want to do. So why even bother starting, right? That's not helpful, right? That's very discouraging. And so, to recognize those voices and recognize the inner critic, which actually goes back to step 1, because when you sit down and when you are with yourself, right, you'll notice those thoughts and then you'll notice that you don't have to latch onto those thoughts and you can let them go, right? So step 4 is really just step 1. And then once you get past step 4, step 5 is to dream big, right? To think about what you want your life to be about. What would your life look like if you didn't have fears holding you back? What would your life look like if money were of no concern, right? Like to really allow yourself to be creative, to be free in terms of dreaming. And then step 6 is to take consistent and steady action on your dreams. Because if you have dreams that you don't take action, then nothing's going to come into fruition, right? So it's being consistent about the actions that you take. And when you have clarity around what it is that you want, your actions will be aligned to what it is that you want.
Right, right. Now I'm going to get a little more detailed into some of those points because they are a great conversation starter. And I'm going to start straight away with the inner critic part. There's one of a point within that which says you give names to inner critics. That's very interesting. I want to know your inner critic name and why and how does this help?
Yes. So my inner critic is Cruella. And the reason why it helps is because when you give your inner critic a name, you learn to disassociate from the thoughts that emanate from your inner critic, right? Because you can say that it's coming from Cruella, it's not coming from me. Like I'm the person noticing
Mhm.
Cruella saying these things,
Right.
right? And that makes it easier not to follow that thought. Because the thing is, like, when we have thoughts, like we just end up running with the thoughts, latching onto the thoughts, not questioning whether the thought is true or not. But when you're able to give it a name, it's easier to disassociate from the thought and recognize that it's not you.
Mm-hmm. Right. True. And where did this idea of Cruella come in? When did you get that idea? And is it more like that frenemy that you have who really is always with you but really doesn't want you to succeed in life?
I see it a little differently. I see it in a couple ways. So Corella came a few years ago. She is, if you're familiar with 101 Dalmatians,
Right.
she is the villain from that movie. I feel like the other way that I look at this that I also find helpful is that, sometimes it's because you had asked if it's the frenemy. And I actually think that what I call the ego mind, which is the inner critic can fall under the ego mind, but the ego mind is there to protect us, right? Like thousands of years ago, if there were anything foreign that entered into our lives, like we would really have to work to fend for ourselves. Otherwise, we would die, right?
Right.
But the brain has evolved in such a way that even when things are not real threats in our lives, it appears as a threat. And that's what happens when you leave your comfort zone and you do something different and you're putting yourself out there, because all of the fears will come up, right? Like fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of success, right? And so the ego mind is really there to protect us, right? So when you think about it, it can seem, I can see the frenemy thing because it seems like an enemy, but what if it's a friend trying to protect you, right? So you just acknowledge that the thoughts have popped up. You thank them for showing up, and then you just choose not to follow the thought. Like, thank you for sharing this with me. I understand that you're there to protect me,
Mhm.
and I'm going to choose a different thought.
Very nice. Great. And then I'm now going to move into the dreams aspect of it. The dreams, some work towards meeting their basic necessities, while some work towards building a future idea or companies come into life, right? But what about those people who don't have a dream or next steps in life? How do they really cultivate this process of planning the next steps in life?
I think that everyone has dreams. I think that it's about being honest with
Mm-hmm.
what it is that you truly want. I
Mm-hmm.
think that people who think that they don't have dreams think that because they don't want to be honest about the dreams that they have,
Right.
because deep down inside they don't think that it's possible. So it's easier to say that I don't have a dream when in actuality you have a dream, but you're just afraid that you can't realize your dream. So that's the first thing that I want to say. But if I were to answer your original question of like, oh, if someone doesn't have any idea, which again, I don't think that's necessarily true,
Right.
I would invite people to think about the people they admire, right? So if people are so accustomed to looking at other people and what they have, like you can turn that in a positive light and think about the people you admire. Why do you admire them? What about their lives really calls to you, speaks to you? And that will inform you about what it is that you want to have in your life, what it is that you want to do with your life
Mm-hmm.
in a way that's positive.
Right. Right. That's true. Okay. And keeping in mind today's generation and keeping in mind the Gen Zs and every professional who's now stepping in from college and getting into offices, there are a lot of people who really believe that they don't want to work for money, be it whatever their financial background is, they want to work for a cause. Now, because you do a lot of training yourself, do you also meet people who don't want to spend heavy on education, work for 10 hours and learn? Do you believe the culture towards working is moving away from how traditionally how we looked at it, where we had to work to survive or to make our dreams come true? Do you think there's a shift in the culture of working?
100%. I think that it's more evident in millennials and Gen Z. I do see it across the board though, because, I work with people in their 20s to their 40s.
Right.
And here's the thing, like because I meet and I talk to a lot of people, so many people that I talk to at the end of the day, if it were up to them, like, I don't think people would be working if they really had like a say in the matter. And if money, weren't an issue. Like, I think most people, what they care about, this is not always the case, but I often see that people really just want time to spend with people they care about. People want time to engage in creative endeavors. People want to travel. Like, there are things that people really care about and wish that they could do more of if they didn't have a 40-hour work week, that is to say. And so I think that it's more common in millennials and Gen Z because they look at baby boomers and the older generation and they see people who have been committed to a company for, let's say, 25 plus years, and they recognize that's not what I want. So I think it's more salient now, and I'm glad that there's a trend, because if more people speak up about what they want, then companies also have to start understanding that the old way of doing things is not working, and it's really important to value what it is that their employees want so that they can maintain retention. So I'm glad that there's this awareness. And personally, my belief is that the 40-hour work week came from the Industrial Revolution, and times are changing. And I think that even the way that the education system was created, I think it was created in alignment with the Industrial Revolution. But there are so many things that are important in life that aren't taught in school, right? Like financial literacy, emotional intelligence, like how to actually go for your passions and your interests versus just learning about like reading and math and science, those things are important too, don't get me wrong. But I think like turning inward and like really understanding who you are, what you stand for, what you care about, what it is that you want to do, like all of that is important as well. And I think that there's definitely a trend where people are realizing that, especially with what has happened in the last year. I think people are less prone to take things for granted and are more have the time to really think about what is it that I want to do with my life? Because, so much has happened in the last year where people have just been, dying because of COVID. And I think it's really gotten people to question, like, what is it that I want my life to be about?
Right. This is a vicious circle. And I'll put in the parts of the circle to use. Like, for example, if you take last year's case, right? Now, the first thing that happened was people feared that keeping jobs were more important at that point of time because they didn't want to get fired. One part is that. Second part was those people who really got fired or they were ready to leave their job to now start something. But they were also skeptical whether pandemic is a good time to start something new or not, right? And then there was the third part of it, which we are discussing right now, about the whole aspect of people feeling the intent to ask and speak about it. But what about the ever demanding industry, which demands resources to work for 8 to 10 hours, because of the demand that comes from the client or demand that comes from the third party, where the organization is forced in terms of putting in resources to work and get the work done. In such scenarios, how does this vicious circle break free?
Yeah. So here's the thing, like in America, for example, people who sign up for consulting and investment banking, like you're putting upwards of like 80 hours per week into your job. But the thing is, like, when you sign up for that job, like, what you're getting yourself into. And so that's a choice that you've made, right? To get into an industry like that. Like, you're not going to go into investment banking and expect 40-hour work weeks, right? So I think it's about understanding the choices that you're making and the sacrifices that you're making when you make certain choices, right? That's the first thing. Now, the second thing is if you're working for an organization where that's not what you signed up for, right? But the work has started piling on, then that is about managing expectations and managing upwards and managing essentially your boss and manager, and to let them know that this isn't working and this is, how I would like for it to work, and have like open and honest conversations, obviously in like a professional and cordial manner about how things could be working better. So I think it depends on the situation that you find yourself in.
Absolutely. Okay, awesome. And, just to conclude this part of it, then where does the 6 life purpose points that you mentioned earlier come into a situation like COVID, like the thing that we mentioned about people, they didn't want to get fired. They were skeptical about trying something new and dream bigger during pandemic. How do those 6 pointers come into the picture in terms of a situation like a COVID-19?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the first thing that I want to say is that, so I'm going to point out Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you're familiar with that.
Mhm.
Maslow was a psychologist and he came up with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a pyramid, I think, with like 4 different tiers. And on the very bottom tier is just like basic fundamental needs, right? Like having food, shelter, water, clothes in your back, a place to live, right? And then higher up, I think it's like interests and doing things that are meaningful for you. And then up on top is like self-actualization, right? And so the reason why I mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs is because I understand that everyone is in a different situation, especially during times of COVID. So for people who, have food to put on the table or families to take care of, right? Yes, on the one hand, maybe you realize that like there are things that you want to do otherwise, but maybe financially it may not work then. Fundamentally, it's important to have your basic needs met before you can go to the second tier, the third tier of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I think it's about getting really honest with yourself about like what your resources look like and actually crunching out the numbers to see if things would work out, right? So it's like if you quit your job, but you're not able to provide for yourself, then like maybe that's not the route to take right now, right? But if you quit your job and you feel like you have a cushion, a financial cushion to work with, then maybe this is the time to take that leap of faith, especially if you have like a track record of having steady jobs. Because if you have that track record, you'll always be able to enter back into the workforce. So I think it's a case by case analysis of like what the quote unquote best option is for people during these times.
Right. Great stuff there, Angela. That concludes our first round of questions. Now, more questions coming at you, but this is in the form of rapid fire. Are you ready for this?
Yes.
All right, then. I hate my job. When someone tells you this, what's your instant reply to them?
What don't you like about your job?
Okay. Where did the weekend go? When someone tells you that, what is your reply?
I hope you had fun.
Okay. When someone says, I can't wait to take a break, you say?
Oh man, that's probably not a good sign.
Okay. How much, according to you, is enough to be happy in life?
Wow, that's deep. My spiritual side says that what we have right now is enough.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
It's a journey.
Yeah. True.
Because the thing is like, and I'm just going to make a side note. I know this is a rapid fire session, but if we think that we'll be happy when we have X or Y or Z, we will never be happy. This is so important for me to say because once you get X, you'll be temporarily happy and then you'll return to your baseline and then you'll want Y and then you'll get Y and then you'll be temporarily happy and then you'll return back to your baseline, right? So like to think that we'll be happy when we have whatever it is, it's false. And that's why I say to be happy now with what is and what we have now.
Very well said there. Okay, moving on. Forget about others waiting for 5 p.m. to get their work done. What does Angela normally do at 5 p.m.?
It really depends on the day. So I feel incredibly fortunate that I have such control over my schedule.
Mm-hmm.
So I take it day by day. Sometimes I'm working, sometimes I'm out and about. I don't have a clear, definitive answer as to what I'm doing at 5 p.m. on any given day.
Right. Okay. In one word, tell us, how does it feel like to live your purpose?
One word is really hard. What I want to say is I feel like I'm walking on the path towards my true north.
Wow.
Fulfilling.
Uh-huh.
fulfilling. But the sentence was, I feel like I'm walking towards my true north. And I think, I know it's rapid fire, but it's like I have so much to say. I just really want to encourage people to follow their true north and to do the things that speak to them, because we only have one life. There is no dress rehearsal, in this lifetime.
Wow. Okay. And finally, what's next for you lined up this year?
More expansion of myself, expansion of my business, expansion. That was the word that I started out with this year, and it's the word that I would like to continue with.
Oh, wow. Fantastic. And that concludes our second segment. And now moving into our last segment, we take this question from our followers or from the internet. And this question comes from Anuja Shankar, who says, I love doing a lot of things. I actively travel. I also love my job because it pays me really well. But I also have 10 other dreams on my checklist before I retire. All of these ideas demand time, collaboration, and money. How do I action even one of them, not worrying about if I will succeed or fail at it in the course of time and still live a happy life?
Wow, beautiful question. Okay, so the first thing I want to say is that we think that we define things as being a success or a failure, but I don't think that anything is ever a failure. I really actually am opposed to the word fail. Like the way that I look at the word fail is first attempt in learning. So even if you quote unquote fail, you will have learned something in the process that will help you move forward, right? You'll learn something about yourself. You learn something about how you could do things better, right? And it's going to help you. Like it's all part of the journey. So I don't think that it's black and white, like, oh, it's either success or failure. So that's the first thing I want to say. And I think that if you shift the way that you look at quote unquote success and look at quote unquote failure, there will be less pressure and you can enjoy the journey versus just trying to get to destination, which goes back to what I mentioned before. Like if you think that you'll be happy when you reach your destination, it's a false notion. And that applies here as well, right? And so I would just encourage her to do what it is that really speaks to her in this moment. And that will inform her like what to do next.
Mm-hmm. Right. Excellent stuff. And Angela, unfortunately, this brings us to the end of today's episode. And such a meaningful and purposeful conversation this was. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. I had a great time hosting you on the episode today. I hope you had a good time too.
Yes, it was so much fun. Thank you so much for having me. I think you asked really deep, thought-provoking questions, and I hope people really get something out of this when they listen.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and I wish you all the very best. Please stay safe, and thank you so much.
Yeah, same to you. Thank you, Dakshin.
Well, either you know your purpose or it's never too late to find it. If you have any questions or feedback, feel free to write to me at thedeliberatetalks@gmail.com or connect with me on the social media channels and the audio platforms. Join in next Monday for another episode. Until then, please take care of yourself and don't forget to inspire and be inspired.